And as usual, we are going to ask you 3 small questions. And I think the first one is comes from the USA, and it's a bit about USA and climate legislation.
I think that in the United States you have, and in many other places, you have a much more fundamental problem of people calling the climate science into question. That's partly, I think, a result of 8 years of no information or disinformation on climate change. It's a result of the fact that the scientific findings are being called into question. And what I would see as a first priority is getting people to understand domestically what the potential implications of climate change are. I mean, there's some really interesting stuff that's been done by EPA and others on the impacts in the US of climate change. And building that public understanding, I think, is a sort of essential first layer to make an advance of any kind. I think that the second layer for me is explaining to people that if you want to avoid the impacts of climate change, but at the same time safeguard economic growth, that it has to be green growth, that is the only way forward. And the third layer for me would be to explain that by doing that, you can also decrease oil dependence and avoid incidents like the one that's happening in the Gulf of Mexico. I would also, I mean, I think the big issue in the case of the Gulf of Mexico is the fact that international or oil exploration at sea is not properly regulated, and the fact that basically the oil industry has been given a carte blanche to do what it wants, especially in international waters. So the challenge, I think, climate or the relation with climate aside, is to work on better regulation for international oil exploration in the context of a realization that green goes in a different direction.
Thanks.
Yeah, we thought it'd be nice to play one-word association. So I say one word and you have to say one word back. Just a few quick ones. So maybe the first one should be bon.
Quick association. Quick association. The first one that popped in my mind was maritime.
Copenhagen.
A disaster.
Cancun.
Promising.
And brackets.
Get rid of them.
Thanks. You missed out trackers.
Oh yeah, how about trackers?
More of them.
Great.
It's what is your worst and what is your best memory in this process of negotiation as executive secretary of the convention?
They're together. I mean, my worst memory is when in Bali negotiations seemed to be breaking down to get the Bali mandate adopted, and my best moment was when that mandate was adopted.
Everything in the same conference?
Everything in the same half hour.
And after that, a very important moment in your life of executive secretary in Copenhagen, perhaps?
Well, I think in political terms, Copenhagen was actually a very important moment in time because of the huge public attention that it attracted, because it did bring together 120 heads of state and government, and because many of the key political issues were at least addressed in the Copenhagen Accord. So even though it didn't, I mean, many people were expecting many different things from Copenhagen. Some were expecting a legally binding treaty. They didn't get that. It's not what I was expecting. Some were expecting a package of implementation decisions. That's what I was hoping for. We didn't get that either. But I do believe that the Copenhagen Accord is an important tool that we can use to advance the negotiations, providing we use it intelligently. So getting that getting that to where it is now was, I think, important.
Okay.
Well, first of all, I would disagree with you. I think that the EU is showing leadership. I think that the EU is showing leadership through the -20, -30. I understand that there's some difficulty in making the shift. I think that the EU is more credible than most in terms of the financial support that it's willing to provide. And I saw in this final small room discussion in Copenhagen, it was actually the EU leaders who suggested that we needed a -80% target for industrialized countries for the mid-century. So I don't think the EU is doing all that badly. I wish some of the others would catch up in that sense. China, I think China is already showing leadership. I think there's been a realization in China, probably for the past 10 years, that the current economic model will not allow China to continue an economic growth of 6, 7, 8% per year, lift people out of poverty and realize the rural to urban migration that's going to happen. So I think for purely national reasons, China has already decided to embark on a different model for economic growth. I think one of the questions in this process is, does greater legal rigor lead to greater ambition, or does legal rigor in fact work against ambition? A lot of people here talk about a legally binding treaty, and for many developing countries, what that means for them in relation to economic growth and poverty eradication goals is not clear. If I ask you, how far can you swim in 60 seconds, and if you fail to swim that far in 60 seconds, you will get a $200 penalty. You will probably say, I can maybe cover 5 meters in 60 seconds just to be on the safe side. But if I say to you that for every meter you swim more than 100 in 60 seconds, you will receive a $10 bonus. You will probably swim 200 meters in 60 seconds in order to get as much of a bonus as possible. And one of the things that worries me in this debate is that the focus on legally binding will actually lead to a lower level of ambition rather than a higher level of ambition. I think it's by looking much more broadly at compliance and enforcement. Let me explain what I mean. We're talking about legally binding targets. Legally binding targets is like setting a maximum speed limit on the highway. Setting a maximum speed limit on the highway only makes sense if you have policemen, radar guns, penalties and courts to enforce that maximum speed limit. And I think that there is a lot that we can do throughout the regime to make it credible. I mean, you can develop very strong rules for what you can or cannot submit for financial support through a NAMA. And you can write very strong rules on what happens if you fail to implement the NAMA project. You can write very strong rules governing red deforestation. You can write very strong rules on national communications and say that if you fail to submit your national communication in time, you will not be allowed to submit a NAMA for financing. So So I think that there is a lot that we can do outside the legally binding targets to actually make a very credible regime that leads to real emission reductions.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
What are you going to be doing on the 2nd to the 6th of August?
2nd to the 6th of August, I have no idea.